ثانية في جلستنا الثانية لهذا
Peace be
اليوم.
upon you and welcome to the second session today in the series of the Symposium of studying the Islamic movements in governance and politics. This week we are discussing Palestine in this session and in specific Hamas movement experience in Gaza and in Palestine in general. In the first session we had 4 papers and they were about coupling the politics and resistance. And this session now will focus more about the lessons learned and prospects for the future. We have 3 papers and then we have 2 commentators. The first paper will be after 1.5 decades of the experience in Gaza, the lessons learned. It will be presented by Dr. Abdulrahman Shihab. He is the founder and the head of Atlas Center for Strategic Studies in Gaza, and he was one of the liberated captives because he participated in the first Intifada, and he was liberated during the Wafa al-Ahrar deal. He has a master's degree and he has made a lot of studies, most importantly the legal practices of the occupation, the Jewish nature of the state, and other studies. And the center that he heads is one of the most important ones, or one of the key centers that looks into the Israeli practices and institutions. The second paper is under the title Hamas and the Palestinian landscape, the prospects for the future and lessons learned. It will be provided by Hani al-Masri. Hani al-Masri is one of the founders of the Palestinian Center for Strategic Studies and Research, one of the key centers in the West Bank and Palestine in general, and it is usually called Masarat. And he is the General Director since April 2011, and he worked in Bada'il Center for Media before 2011, and he is a political analyst and writer, and he has written a lot of papers in a number of Palestinian newspapers, magazines, and he is a columnist in Al-Quds Al-Arabi, and he also written in a number of publications and other areas like in London, the Gulf states, and the Safir of Lebanon and others. He participated in a number of conferences and webinars or seminars, and he was also a member of the General Institution of Publication that is affiliated with the Ministry of Media, and he was a member of the Institution of Yasser Arafat until last year, and he was also a member of the National Dialogue Committee that was held in Cairo. The third paper is under the title Hamas and the Regional and International Landscape, Lessons Learned and the Prospects for the Future. It will be presented by Dr. Mohsen Saleh. Dr. Mohsen is a professor of Palestinian Studies, and he is specializes in the international relations, and he is the head of a Zaytuna Center of Studies and Advisory Center, and he provides studies about the Palestinian issue, and he is the head of the history and the civilization in the Malaysian University, and he has got a lot of rewards in research and teaching, and he has issued more than 15 books in the Palestinian issues, and more than he contributed to writing more than 20 chapters in scientific books. And from 2005 until 2020, there has been 20 versions of the strategic magazine that is published, and he was also the editor-in-chief of the daily Strategic Palestine. It has more than 20,000 editions published. After that, there will be 2 commentators. The first comment will be by Mr. Jawad Al-Hamad. He is a holder of a BA from Kuwait in 1984 and MA from Durham University in International Relations and Political Sciences, and he is the head of the Middle East Center for Studies, and this is one of the key centers for studies in the Arab world, which is headquartered in Amman. And the magazine that is issued from that center is one of the most important magazines or journals that is published in the Arab world. Afterwards, we will have a comment from Dr. Wa'il Shadid. Wa'il Shadid is a thinker and strategist who specializes in the strategic issues. He graduated from Jinan University and from Canadian University, and he has a degree or his specialization in strategic management, and he has a number of publications, including the management, the theory of a change, and other books and publications. Welcome all. We have a distinguished group of speakers talking about a very important topic that has to do with looking into the experience of Hamas, trying to find the lessons learned of this experience in a number of issues, whether inside Palestine or in general, in the regional or international level. We will start and we will give 25 minutes to, or 20 minutes to each speaker. We will start with Mr. Shihab. Welcome all. I would like to welcome you all in this meeting, and I would like to thank the SIGA for organizing this important event, and I would like to thank Dr. Sami Al-Aryan, the head of SIGA, for giving me this opportunity to participate in the series of studying the Islamic experience in politics and governance. In order to understand the experience of Hamas in governance, we try to give an objective understanding or analysis of the experience, taking into consideration the environment and the conditions that this experience took place in. Despite the difficult conditions, Hamas managed to reformulate the doctrine of the security forces, and it had a model under the siege, a model that is that reached the level of the deterring balance with the enemy. And Muhammad Hussein Haikal 10 years ago said that it is a bright model in the wrong time. Until now, the experience of Hamas couldn't provide an Islamic experience in governance that we can consider as an inspiring one, even if we consider that a large part of that is due to the challenges and conditions that were that the enemies and the adversaries share in creating. But this experience didn't provide a transparent model of governance in economy and politics, in addition to the security concerns. Based on a survey that, or an opinion poll that we made in the Atlas Center in September 2020, and before that, and in addition to the surveys or the opinion polls that we do in the Palestinian territories, we can conclude that the Palestinian people find that Hamas can provide an opportunity to reform the political system, because it provided a model in security that can protect the citizens, and it has a model of resistance that is wise in confronting the enemy, and it has a rational struggle against the enemy. But it needs to reform its management or administrative system, because the level of satisfaction about the management in Gaza is declining, and actually it gets better during the escalation of the enemy. It seems that the security aspect of that of the system is more advanced and is better, whereas other municipalities and other administrative aspects are not as good. In terms of the health, for example, the role of the government is limited to the salaries that are provided, but operating the medical equipment and hospitals, what Hamas can provide is leaking to the private sector, which is a heavy burden for citizens. I wanted to put in my paper, and this was an introduction, I wanted in my paper to divide it into, or to present my viewpoint in three axes or three topics. The first one is the environment in which this experience emerged. by evaluating, when we evaluate the experience, we need to take into consideration the environment, because we have different opinions from those who are working in this experience and the goals. So this came under the Oslo Accord system, and the Israelis didn't want this to have to be a centralized issue that can threaten the Israeli interest. And in addition, in order to destroy the Palestinian ability to rule. One of these, the goals of this system that came after Oslo to combat the Islamic movements. So it was very difficult to have any improvement or any creation of this or coordination between the Islamic movements and those who were involved in Oslo. And the relation between these two currents relied completely on the zero-sum game approach. So Hamas is not a project of a state, or it's not a defection from a government. It is a project of liberation, and at the same time, it's not only an organization that that performs resistance, which is in control of a region or an area. The occupation describe it as an organization that takes an area or a territory hostage with its people. So during the experience of liberation, Hamas managed to control a piece of land with its people that the occupation withdrew from. So the experience of Hamas movement or the government system in Gaza cannot issue, for example, a license, a birth license in the civil registry. Nevertheless, despite all of these conditions and the crises, Hamas is burdened with the problem of the Islamic movements and its relation with the modern state and the elements of democracy in Islam and other problems that is faced with every Islamic movement in the world that are not solved yet in a way that can be followed. So the question of democracy and Islam, and secularism and religion, the state and the religion, all of these are problems that are not unresolved yet by any Islamic movement. So despite all of these conditions, Hamas managed to have a stronghold inside Palestine, first through the legitimacy of resistance and condemning Oslo. This gave popularity to Hamas within the Palestinian community. And number two, taking use or making use of the resistance. And Al-Qassam battalions protected the ballot boxes before they come to governance, and the executive force that was created by Saeed al-Siyam was there, but then the doctrine of those forces changed when they become in governance in Gaza Strip. The second line that I want to evaluate Hamas experience through is the extent to which Hamas managed not only to couple between governance and resistance, but what did it provide to the resistance, and whether the resistance improved under Hamas. Maybe Hamas managed to understand that the plan of the occupation was to create or to conduct agreements at the same time that can narrow down the opportunities for the Palestinians and to destroy the Palestinian experience, so no one can benefited from after the occupation withdraw from the agreements that they make. Hamas managed emanating from the doctrine of resistance. It managed to improve the experience of resistance. So the performance of the government provided support to the resistance. It allowed it to avoid the internal targeting and the security targeting of individuals, which didn't allow it to get information on the ground. So the movement was capable to protect its members from being targeted, and the enemy couldn't kill the individuals inside Palestine. Well, that was called by the enemy cutting the grass or the journeys of hunting of those individuals. So Hamas managed to be more rational in the confrontation of the occupation in a deterrent approach that caused harm to the economy of the enemy, and it managed to build tunnels, to dig tunnels, and to make possibility to live and to survive. And the resistance in Palestine was the first one to strike a blow to the occupation in January 2009. Nevertheless, sorry, it was under a strike by the occupation, but nevertheless it managed to survive and to reformulate itself. Now, after 15 years of this experience, we can say that the Israeli security theory that was established since Ben Gurion, with the additions that are made to it, which was made or built on determination and imposing the will of the enemy on the battle, this policy is on the retreat, and the enemy is unable to have the decisive say in any battle with the resistance. The second element of this theory, which is the alert, it's also on the decline, and the resistance in several operations to prove that it took the initiative, and the enemy didn't have information about what was about to happen. And also, there was even in the fierce, untraditional or unconventional force of the enemy, it's lost its weight in the battle with the resistance. And there are models even in this field that prove this point. After the decline of this security theory to protect this entity, and as the resistance made achievements in this field, the only option for Israel was to hit the constituency of resistance by distinguishing the living standards between Gaza Strip and other territories in Palestine, and it's made this relation with the resistance as a management of a crisis. So the Palestinian resistance in Gaza Strip in general, and here we need to mention that there are crises that the resistance couldn't overcome yet. In light of what we are talking about, we know that the Strip has witnessed improvement since the Al-Aqsa Intifada until today in the past 15 years. However, the military resistance, all of it became the defense of Gaza and some operations here and there in Gaza Strip, and that was called the balance of deterrence and the provocation of the occupation. But we can say that the occupation managed to limit and corner the resistance in Gaza, and Gaza is not anymore the daily threat to Israel, unless there are some operations that are related to Jerusalem, and this became something extraordinary in the past year. This was one of the crises of the resistance, because it is a movement of liberation for all of Palestine, not only for Gaza Strip. So the army, this made the army in need of donations and to a lot of budget, and the Arab countries were not providing that. And the resistance, of course, will be under, if they are going to receive donations, they will be under the policies of those countries that are supporting resistance, or at least they need to take into considerations the demands of those countries. We, in our assessment, we believe that Hamas and Israel, after this formula of deterrence, they don't want to escalate, and each one of them, they want to eliminate any justifications of the escalation, and they want to blame the other, that, or whenever there is an operation, they say that it is a limited operation in time and place.
Another challenge to the resistance was the need for the need of the government to the resistance, and this created an overlap between authorities and made Hamas infringe and undermine some of the authorities and powers of the government in Gaza Strip. Another crisis for Hamas in Gaza, after the media took a role in the battles and the conflicts, the resistance started to focus on victory in an image. And there were many victories that they have accomplished in this regard, the most recent of which was the Sword of Jerusalem operation and the flags march in Jerusalem in 2021. This devotion to victory in the image makes it forget sometimes that settlers and the occupation are Judaizing Jerusalem on a daily basis and violating sacred places. When things happen under the table, such as the King Abdullah Accord and agreement, the resistance does not confront or make or declare any position from those issues. The third topic is the crisis of political system in Palestine in this experience. Of course, Hamas did not expect in the elections of 2006, did not expect to get to this position, which takes it to the leadership of the the political system. Hence, it was only wanting to increase its share of power, but in 2006 it won and had to create or form a government that it hoped to create alongside Fatah. But the conflict between both movements and the conviction of Fatah that it should not open the international arena to Hamas, because this may pronounce the end for Fatah and create domination for Hamas in the political arena in Palestine. So Fatah did not give Hamas that chance, and they got out from the Hamas leadership or the Hamas government in Gaza, leaving Hamas behind face to face with the conditions of the quartet, no matter how pragmatic and what the charters were pragmatic or accommodating. The international community could not accept Hamas to be part of this international system. On the fourth point, which is the governmental performance in this experience, there was no Arab democratic experience, although there were attempts to run elections, reform institutions, create independence of judiciary. However, all of this was undermined by the monopoly of power in the hands of the presidency in Palestine under Abu Ammar and later under Mahmoud Abbas. It is based on the hegemony of the ruling party, which is the backbone of the governance system and the political regime in Palestine. So decision making is quite centralized, and the heads of security agencies also had a great say. This was the political system inherited by Hamas, but how Hamas was able to gather this contradiction, but it centralized it even further, even more than it was centralized under Fatah in governance. Although it was more stable, but it became more centralized, more authoritative in terms of giving hegemony for the ruling party on the political system in Gaza Strip. Also, during the Palestinian division, all governmental institutions, including media, judiciary, etc., they all tried to defend the experience in Gaza Strip. All institutions in Gaza Strip had to defend the regime and the political system in Gaza Strip against the propagation of the PLO on the West Bank, and on the other hand, there was counter provocation. So defense of the regime was based on a blind or a blanket basis. So the evaluation and monitoring institutions lost their edge to do their monitoring and evaluation mission, which challenged the transparency. And this is one of the characteristics of dictatorships. But in terms of the government performance, the security challenge was the one in which Hamas excelled in imposing security and addressing all the factors that may give rise to a recurrence of civil strife, so much so that the inhabitants of Gaza Strip gave a breath of relief after Hamas took power in Gaza and took control of security. So in the security sector and in resistance, the government performed very well. But in other institutions and other sectors, other branches of the government and services, etc., there was a decline. And this is not only to be blamed on the siege only, but also on the performance of the government itself. And this is acknowledged by the representatives of the government themselves. 40% of the problems are attributed to the government itself and 60% to the Israeli siege. This, in brief, is an evaluation of the experience of Hamas in Gaza Strip. Thank you so much, Mr. Abdulrahman Shihab. He said in his paper that the experience of the Palestinian regime is rather short in comparison to neighboring regimes, including that of Hamas. The experience of Hamas, which started at least 1 decade after the Palestinians came back to the occupied land, there were a number of obstacles. If we are to judge Hamas as an experience of governance, then we must look at the environment in which this experience grew or developed. And he gave a number of examples to show what kind of environment it was. And then he talked about Hamas as an Islamic movement that emanated from the Muslim Brotherhood, and also the questions of democracy and Islam, the modern state questions, and questions of politics and governance. The challenge to this, he said, was that this wasn't only a political movement, but a resistance movement, and this was a challenge. And the major challenge was the presence of occupation and the Zionist project in the region. Then in his paper, he talked about the government being in the service of resistance, and he mentioned many things related to the reality experienced in this experience, and the different siege conditions, the security and military circumstances, and regional circumstances as well. He pointed out some accomplishments as well as failures, and he also mentioned the Israeli policy towards the Gaza Strip and the different options made by the different parties and how they can be evaluated. He talked about resistance in its general notion and concept, and he said that taking over the power in Gaza Strip allowed Hamas to enhance its capabilities in military terms and in the terms of protecting its cadres and their properties and their training positions and systems and their ability to accumulate experience and power. And over 15 years, they managed to become a deterring force, so much so that Israel has been deterred against trespassing Gaza Strip, although they have paid for this dearly in human terms. And he said also in security terms, the performance was very well and very good, and it created a secure environment in the community. And in his paper, he also talked about the dilemma at the level of politics and government and the division between Ramallah and Gaza. He said that the choice for Hamas was to continue in governance, to promote its status in the community through two forms of legitimacy: by the power and force of resistance imposed upon occupation. But however, the historic disagreement with the other factions did not permit it to get the full legitimacy. He said that Hamas in governance is different from Hamas in opposition, that is in the previous decade, and Hamas was able to differentiate between its different parts of thought, such as refraining from trying to impose Sharia or hudud when it took a power of or authority of the judiciary, and they used a more realistic approach. And then he talked about the dilemma or the crisis of resistance that he said after the uprising of Al-Aqsa in 2000, there was a military development, and the different factions, particularly Hamas, they excelled in improving their military capacities and in engaging in prisoner swaps and other engagements or equations until they reached the formula of the balance of deterrence. He also mentioned that the Palestinian division, or the presence of the Palestinian division, made the PLO a legitimate representative of Palestinians, but it created a hostile environment for Hamas, because PLO wanted to strip Hamas of any political achievement, and he gave some examples on this. And then he concluded talking about the governmental performance, and he criticized this performance. He said that while the security and resistance performance was very good, there was a decline in terms of services, service provision, and other sectors. And he said that this was partly attributed to the government and partly to the siege by the Israelis. Thank you so much, and I am sorry to be too brief in this summary, but the commentators have read your papers in full and will be able to comment on them properly. Now I give the floor to Mr. Hani Al-Masri. Please go ahead, sir.
دكتور هاني لا نسمعك. أستاذ هاني الصوت لو تكرمت.
اسمحوا لي في البداية.
Mr. Hani, can you unmute your microphone? Allow me at the beginning to thank the Center of Islam and Global Affairs in Salahuddin Zaim University, and to thank my friend Dr. Sami Al-Arian, the hard-working and outstanding in his activity throughout his career. In my presentation, I will focus on one main subject, which is the possibility or the likelihood of combining authority and resistance. This is the main question I will address, and I will talk about some points that would help understand this point. My point of departure is that things are judged by their outcomes, so not on assumptions, presumptions, or ambitions, or wishful thinking. So our point of departure should be based on what is rather than what could be or what should be. So unless we assess accurately or the reality or the status quo, we will fail to make any plans or to change or improve. The status quo is that the Palestinian cause, Palestinian factions, and Palestinian governments are in a general crisis. Doesn't mean that all factions are responsible equally for this crisis, but since there is a general crisis, and since Hamas is a national movement that is present in Gaza and in Palestine at large, in the public arena, it cannot refrain or distance itself from this general crisis. When I talk about this general crisis, it doesn't mean that there are not much manifestations of steadfastness, resistance, whether for Hamas or with other experiences of the Palestinian people. What happened in Ramadan and over the past few days only bears witness to what I am saying. There is a lot to be honored and to respect in our reality, but it should not blind us from the status quo and the current situation. Another issue also, I am talking about Hamas as a Palestinian organization or a Palestinian movement, not restricted or exclusive to Gaza Strip, because this division and separation does not only exist in the fissure between Fatah and Hamas, between the West Bank and Gaza, but there are many aspects, so much so that we have forgotten to speak about Palestinian leaders as Palestinians. And now we talk about individuals more than we talk about groups. This introduction leads me to the first point. First of all, the experience of establishing an authority under occupation. In principle, this is a wrong undertaking. I asked and searched. There is no history for an authority under occupation because it blocks any real potential or horizons for genuine liberation. This is a reality that we have seen firsthand, especially after the signing of the Oslo Accords. And despite all the problems in the Oslo Accord, Israel hasn't even honored any of its provisions and used it as a stepping step for its expansive projects. And the Palestinian president tried to overcome this, but it was too late. He was already trapped in his cage. So this problem was the source of the crisis. And at the time, Hamas was against the Oslo Accord and undertook martyr operations and other sorts of operations in order to resist the occupation on the one hand, and also to stop the Oslo Accord on the other. And this was no secret, of course. And we heard it a lot from Khalid Mish'an and others that Hamas wanted to create an alternative body, but they clashed into an Arab and international position that made it hard to establish this body. The first positive point was that it was in 2003 that Hamas gave confidence to the authority when Mahmoud Abbas took power. He had to acknowledge that the change of governance and the authority in Palestine was not a Palestinian decision. This change in the introduction of the prime minister, the position of a prime minister, was in response for Bush's address that called for the creation of a Palestinian leadership that fights or combats terrorism. So this change of the form of governance was not part of good governance or good practices, but part of an dictated measure. And then in 2005, Hamas decided to engage in the elections, and it started to talk about Oslo having been killed and that it was over. And we heard this from a number of speakers today. Hence, this allowed Hamas to engage in the elections it refrained from in 1996. All of this needs to be evaluated. We shouldn't talk about that in passing. The elections in 1996 were better than the elections in 2006 because after the uprising, the staff of the PLO became even more domesticated, so to speak. Not Oslo was in a place, but only the Palestinian commitments in Oslo were in place, while no Israeli commitment whatsoever. Israel raided ABC zones, was increasing settlements, so we had an autonomy that is much narrower, much smaller, affiliated with the occupation. The point of reference of the peace process became security-based rather than political, which the PLO accepted without reserve, while Sharon established around 14 reservations, basically undermining it altogether. If we don't understand those milestones, we will not understand the current situation. All of what happened was not basically because of the resistance, but because there was an international movement that may have restricted its movement So it tried to use the time because it could not bear the demographic weight of the Gaza Strip. So he put the trap for the Palestinians, and I believe that this is something that many analysts have found out. Asked Israel how can they withdraw from Gaza Strip, and they said that if we withdraw, there would be internal strife between Fatah and Hamas, and they would prove to the world that they are not worthy of they're not worthy of establishing their own state. And unfortunately, this was a self-fulfilling prophecy. So because they sowed the seeds for Palestinian division, we all celebrated the liberation of the Gaza Strip when we didn't realize this scenario in the back. It doesn't mean that the resistance did not play a role in the liberation of Gaza, but we need to see the full picture in order to understand what is going on. The Gaza Strip is still occupied because 20% of it is under direct occupation. So until today, we have 20% of the area of Gaza Strip. It's occupied because it is sieged, because it's classified in international law as an occupied territory, because it says that as long as the occupying power continues to establish its power, then it's still an occupied territory. Of course, what we were able to do is we established security, but in prison. And with all due respect, I don't believe, Mr. Abdurrahman, I don't believe we have established the balance of deterrence. So we have improved, but to be clear, we are not there yet. So the losses of and those killed from the Israelis since the uprising and the Gaza Strip wars, 155 in one Gaza war, 33 in 2021, we have 15, etc. If we look at the Palestinian victims, we have more than 7,000 Palestinian martyrs in this period. Of course, what we have done is good. It's steadfastness, it's resistance. But the reality now is that we have this calm in return for some facilitations. And in the West Bank, we have security coordination, which is far worse than with the situation in Gaza Strip. This is the reality we are living in. So we have, in order to be able to establish our visions and plan out our way forward, it is important to understand the status quo. Is it possible for us to remove settlers and that refugees would come across borders from neighboring Arab countries, and that this wishful thinking is one thing, and the reality is another? And the Arabs of 1984, 48, have become part of the Knesset, and they have a parliamentary bloc. So the situation in Palestine, there are many inspiring phenomena, and there are many achievements and accomplishments, but there are many challenges. And I'm saying this because it is very painful. If we have been doing very well, they wouldn't have done what they have done in the funeral procession of Shireen Abu Aqle. The division is happening, and settlements are ongoing. When we talk about hundreds of thousands of settlers, we're told that there are about larger figures, even of more than 900,000 settlers. This These are very scary figures. And also we have the desperation of the PLO and the illusion of the opposition, etc. We're saying that so far the elections were not held or have been postponed for 2 years. We've been talking about a national front, but what have we been doing? We're steadfast. That's important, but that's not enough. Things are judged by their ends and outcomes in order to see and understand the importance of putting an end of division. You hear people saying that there is no division. And no, there is a division, and it's deepening, and it's becoming a region-based. Jenin is now in a battle on its own. 2 days ago, in the mosques, they were calling out, they wanted bullets from Hebron. They had no bullets. Each area is fighting on its own. Hamas and all resistance factions have to put a plan for all Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere, and for us to move together based on that plan, not to call people for an individual initiative. It is a form of desperation. Hence, this is an issue that we see because when we have accumulated military power, right, but we are unable to invest it or make use of it because of the occupation power. We have also to consider the environment, the regional powers, the international actors, and the great opportunities that we might have. Talking about the end of Israel in 1 month, 6 months, or 6 years. If we continue this way, it will not go anywhere. But if we create and equip ourselves properly and prepare our plan, it will end, because it is a foreign entity in so just by spreading optimism, it will not beget optimism. It will beget helplessness or dependency. The armed resistance has to equip or devise an active and effective strategy. If I were in the position of Hamas, and I have advised them previously that even if I engage in this election, I will not engage with the PLO and Fatah, because it is an Oslo-based authority. Actually, we don't want those commitments of Oslo to be honored anymore. Actually, we want them not. We want abandoning them to be part or in the forefront of the national agenda. This was the mistake of the former government of the PLO, because if you recognize PLO, and this will mean that you acknowledge Oslo. It was a substitute, rather. That's why Hamas, in its focus on authority in Gaza, it has become that the resistance was in service of the authority more than the authority in service of the resistance. But this exception has not become a way of thinking or a method. And of course, I would like to say that our missiles in Gaza are not necessarily very accessible, because we pay dearly. So the fixed lines have to be fixed and have to be clear, not variable. We say that if they do and division of Al-Aqsa, spatial and temporal division, we would use this power, etc. But actually, they don't stop doing one step or another. Bennett, Netanyahu, or Hans, their basic plans are continuous. The smart and the dumb plans continue, and we have to look at this reality so comprehensively to devise a resistance strategy for the or are we working on resistance for resistance sake? Has resistance itself become an idol to be worshipped? In my point of view, there is no contradiction between liberating part and liberating all Palestinian territories.
The official authority before Oslo and after Oslo, they want to get to their rights through concessions and not through the negotiations. So we need to put temporary and gradual goals that we can achieve in order to make optimism, because what strengthens the opposition or the resistance is the hope and not killing, for example, an Israeli here and there. Since July 2004, we have one uprising after the other, but without any results. Before any incident that will happen in Jerusalem will lead to a comprehensive intifada. Now we don't see that. Why? So we need to see that what the authority that we have in the West Bank or in Gaza, this is an authority that is taking into consideration strategies and certain issues for governance. For example, I don't believe that the authority in Gaza or in with the West Bank to dismantle them will be useful, but we need to think or revisit these issues. If we make confrontation with Israel, is this authority will going to fall? Yes, but it should not be one of our toppling this authority should not be one of our priorities. Now, if we say that you can't say that Hamas is not governing Gaza solely, and other factions didn't contribute because it is ruling solely in Gaza. So there is no transparency, there is no rational governance or good governance in Gaza by Hamas. There are, of course, the comprehensive elections can be postponed until there is unity, but there are elections for the syndicates, for the municipalities, for the universities, and now other forces are not present to work. There are sectors and there are institutions that can participate in the political work within a comprehensive work. We cannot make comparisons between the authoritarian of Hamas and the authoritarian of rule of Fatah. Hamas should make an example, a bright example for governance. And they should not suffice by talking about the liberation of Palestine. The liberation of Palestine is the goal of all Palestinians. And there are changes, there are variables. So usually we get out of a crisis losing. We have a part of that is ourselves to blame, because we need to learn how to deal with these issues. These are important points that we need to take into consideration in this regard. There is something that is deliberated a lot, which is the peaceful deliberation or circulation of power. This issue is not during a period of national liberation. The relations in the national liberation should be the national front and a national dialogue. And when we make elections, not to see who is going to rule after the elections, these the rights should not be open to referendum. There should be a kind of consensus about them, but the problem is about the details. But there are common grounds that should bring us together or bring people together. So if we don't have or we don't feel comfortable with the leadership, so we need to work on that. for change through popular support, but we don't decide that we want to do that or do this once we want to have different things at different times. This chaos will not work with us. The formal authority is one thing, and Fatah authority is a different thing. And I don't believe that Fatah is in control now. For example, the Central Committee of Fatah didn't meet, and we don't know what is its program. And by coincidence, about 20 years ago, I had attended the meetings of the Palestinian leadership only twice, and they stopped inviting me because when it was in its best ways, it was a farce. Fatah is not ruling, and there is no genuine Palestinian government. So how can we make a front that includes all people, all stakeholders, including Fatah, to change the reality? This will be the yardstick to see what we are doing and what we are achieving. But to wait them alone to collapse, they are not going to collapse because they have supporting mechanisms, that whether they are Arab or US or Israeli support structures that is providing them with lifelines.
انه اذا شيرين ابو عاقله اسرائيل مش قادره تتحمل
If Shirin Abu Akleh, for example, Israel is not willing to tolerate the funeral, her funeral. So if we have this level of enmity by the Israelis to Palestinians, we need to build on these issues and to start to start a dialogue. And when we say dialogue, it doesn't mean that it is a revolution against Oslo and to give an authorization to Abu Mazen, for example. Instead of 6 years, we give them for 1 year of authorization to do whatever he wants, and we must not bring the rope and put it around our neck and then we start to complain. It's not about Abu Mazen or anyone else. We need to have a genuine democratic program, whether we are able to do that or not, and according to that we can judge ourselves. That's what I wanted to say in my paper, which is the ability to bring together the armed resistance and the authority is very difficult in the time of the national liberation, and this is not a normal situation, and it should not happen in such a way. And the authority could not be at the hands of the resisting people. It could be, for example, an in parallel to the resistance. So this is something that was made by 20 researchers, but we didn't have time to 20, but we didn't have time to, or the situation to publish this. Today, we have a situation that is worse than Oslo. Now, we have the goal of the authority or the PLO to go back to Oslo. So now what we are having today is worse than the time of Oslo. So we can't, for example, to justify that they got into the elections, we justify or put the excuse of Oslo. This is not something that should happen. There was American envisage to have a part of the moderate Islam in face of extreme school of Islam. And I know that, and I was visiting Abu Mazen, and some officials came and visited him, and they told him to run the elections, and that Hamas will be good to be. And at the time, the Condoleezza Rice, and I know who met with him, and it's not a hearsay. I know from original sources. Condoleezza Rice was keen on making the elections because she said that Hamas will be busy with the school bags instead of the bags of the mujahideen or the fighters. She said that literally. So Hamas has got into some delusions. They should understand that. And I always tell my colleagues that in Hamas, I am in direct communication with the people in the West and the think tanks, and don't believe them that they are going to give you any recognition. They will recognize you when you recognize Israel and the life side by side with Israel. So you have to improve yourself, and we need to accumulate rights on the ground gradually, just as the Zionist movement has done, until no one can deny us this existence. And there are signs and works that are that we can be proud of, not only in Gaza and West Bank, everywhere where we have Palestinians. We can build on all of that, and the enemy has a lot of crises and a lot of weaknesses, but we need to be aware of our strengths. But we cannot say that Israel is going. When we are stronger, we can say that. We don't want to lose the momentum. Don't imagine that as we are in this weakness today, as Arabs or Palestinians, I don't see that Israel is going anywhere. Now, for example, there are some people who are now paying their condolences to the king of normalization, Mohammed bin Zayed, after the death of his brother, and without asking that there are whether it is halal or not halal to say mercy on his soul, as the controversy was on Shireen Abu Akleh. So thank you very much, Mr. Hani. And Mr. Hani is saying that the talking about Hamas should be about the results and what we see, and not about the wishful thinking. And he says that the situation in Palestine is in a crisis in general, and we are all to be blamed about this crisis, and Hamas is part of that. He said that I'm not talking about the organization of Hamas in Gaza, but as a general or Palestinian organization that is working in the Palestinian cause. There is no liberation movement under occupation that can create an authority which can be sovereign. We have seen that, and we can learn this from our history. This is something that Abu Ammar learned, but after, when it was too late. So the authority is the roots of evil. And when they wanted to get into the political arena, even after 2006, this put us, or this came out of from a foreign willingness. And talking about also that it is over, this is also a fallacy. What we see today is that there is a reformulation of the political situation, which in a way that is worse than the past. And now some people are looking up to achieve Oslo. We are that bad in the situation today. The Israeli community wanted to saw the roots of division in the Palestinian society, and by the winning of Hamas in Gaza. And now we have about 20% of Gaza that is still occupied. So in short, the achievement of Hamas is an achievement inside a prison. Just as prisoners can, for example, do some changes in their conditions, but at the end of the day, they are in prison. And all those that were killed in this period are no more than 12 in 2021 and 18 in 2020, whereas at the same time we had 7,000 Palestinian victims. He said, as the Palestinian situation is moving forward in some fields, but the challenges are also growing, and the situation is getting worse in Palestine and in Al-Aqsa. The most important thing that is being conducted today is the steadfastness, and that's why he said that the division should be ended, otherwise these problems will continue to be there. He said that there is also no unity in the resistance, and no matter how the military power in Gaza is growing, it will remain limited, and that the armed resistance should be part of a comprehensive strategy. Even Hamas, if it has the decision to get into the political elections, it shouldn't have got into the power and to compete under Oslo Accords or Oslo Authority. This was a trap for it, and that made the getting into authority a priority, and the resistance became in service of the government and not the other way around. So there should be to have rules of engagement with the enemy, and he gave an example of the rockets, and he asked the question, is there a strategy to use the weapons? And he asked, how can these goals be achieved? It's not about negotiations, but about it should be implemented through changing the balance of powers. He also asked the question why there is no comprehensive intifada now, although in the past there were intifadas that took place for reasons less than what is happening today in Palestine. Dr. Ra'ed said that the presence of Hamas in the authority made the community weak, and it made the a weak community. When Hamas was in the opposition, we had a strong community and a weak authority. When we are in such a situation, changing the authority should become a priority for us, not necessarily eliminating it. Then he asked whether Hamas was ruling alone in Gaza, and he said yes, it is alone, and there are reasons why the factions refuse to participate. And he asked whether Hamas was providing an example of good governance in Gaza. He said that Hamas should provide good example through gradual work, and he gave an example of the gradual or the deliberation or circulation of peaceful circulation of power in Palestine. He said that this question is a fallacy, and we cannot talk about that when we are under occupation in the country. And he said that the general elections cannot work and we cannot depend on it in the period of national liberation. That's why we don't have an institution in Palestine. That's why we need to have a front that represents the Palestinian struggle. And this is the question that we need to ask, how to build such a front, and how to bringing together or combining authority and resistance at the time is very difficult, and it's not correct. Now we are in a way that is way worse than Oslo, and he said that there was a U.S. plan to get Hamas into the power or into the government in order to get busy in the school bags. And he said that it will never be recognized by the West unless it recognizes Israel. Thank you very much. And now we will move to Dr. Mohsen Saleh. The floor is yours.
لو تكرمت بس الصوت تفتح الصوت.
Unmute yourself, please.
مسموع الآن؟ مسموع الآن؟
Do you hear me now?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of God,
وسعيد جدا بوجودي مع
I'm very glad
الكريمة.
to be with all of the distinguished speakers.
الشكر موصول ل
Some speakers cannot hear.
الشكر أيضا موصول للإخوة.
I would like to thank the brothers in.
المتحدث
أنا عندي ما في صوت للدكتور محسن.
أخي المشكلة عندك فلو تكرمت تخرج وتدخل مرة ثانية في القناة العربية.
So there is some technical problems. So please log out and then log in and get into the Arabic channel because we can hear him well.
طيب.
تفضل دكتور.
الشكر أيضا.
Okay, so I would like to thank the dear brothers in SIGA for organizing this event, especially my dear brother, Dr. Sami Al-Aryan. This is a very distinguished effort that he is conducting to analyze and study the effort or the experience of the Islamic movements. I'm speaking from Lebanon today at the time of the anniversary of the Nakba of Palestine. And the people here are busy with the elections. We have general elections in Lebanon today.
لحظة دكتور محسن لحظة واحدة يظهر أنك لست في القناة العربية
Give me 1 second. It seems that you are not in the Arabic channel. Nobody is hearing you. Are you in the Arabic channel?
في الأسفل على اليمين.
لا هو في القناة الإنجليزية.
طيب أنت في الأسفل.
It seems that you are on the English channel.
العالم مكتوب interpretation.
الآن في القناة العربية.
أنت الآن في القناة العربية؟
الآن
طيب Now we can hear you.
لم يسمعك أحد. سأعطيك الوقت الذي دقيقتين أنت تكلمت دقيقتين الآن سأعطيك إياهم.
So nobody heard you before. So now please repeat. You had spoken for 2 minutes. So repeat that. Okay, I'm so sorry, but you know the situation in Lebanon allows me to be in such a confused way. So once again, I would like to thank you, and I will once again I would like to thank SIGA for organizing this event. Once again, I would like to thank Sami Al-Aryan and his team with all of this effort that is exerted in this field. I also thank the dear distinguished speakers with their papers. Today is the anniversary of the 74th anniversary of the Nakba of Palestine, and today we have elections in Lebanon. And if my internet is not very well, so please forgive me. I hope that I can present it without any problems in the sound. The paper that I was requested to prepare, I will speak here about Hamas and the regional and international landscape and the lessons learned from that. I will focus on 5 points. The first one about the vision of Hamas itself to manage its relations with the Arab, Islamic, and international entities. The second point is about how this relation developed and the presence of Hamas, the political presence of Hamas developed in the international arena. Then the analysis or evaluation and what are the strengths and the weaknesses of Hamas in managing the regional relations. The fourth point is related to the challenges and the shortcomings of Hamas to deal with this landscape. And the last one is about the key lessons learned and how to benefit from this experience for the future. I will start with the first point that is linked with Hamas Vision in terms of its international and regional relations. If you go back to the literature of Hamas, and one of the major studies that was early on in this field, the folder or the volume that was issued from the Middle East Center about Hamas, and then Azaytuna also issued another volume, and in addition to other studies. In brief, if we want to talk about the parameters that Hamas set for itself and they tried to follow in the past 35 years, we find that Hamas considers its political relations and its presence in the international arena is part of its struggle against the occupation, which is complementary to the military struggle, and it serves its field operations, and they are divided into gradual steps, and it is emanating from its vision for liberation. In addition to that, the movement believes in its affiliation to the Palestinian people, the Muslim Ummah, and the Arab Ummah. So this is its strategic depth. So its interaction with it is not only a national issue, but it is also an issue that is related to its Arab and Islamic dimension, and its humanitarian dimension as a humanitarian cause that it is involved in. Also, in building its vision, how it understands the Zionist project and how does it present it to the world, or it sees the Zionist project not only a threat to the Palestinians, but also a threat to the Muslim and the Arab world, and it is a cancerous entity that is present in the heart of the Arab and Muslim world. So this project targets any Renaissance projects in our Ummah, and prevents it from stability. So this entity is an racist entity, and it goes against the direction of history, and it is the last of the traditional occupation or imperialist occupation of the last century. A fourth point that is related in building relations. Hamas doesn't see any problem to build relations with any country in the world. The only banned issue for her is making relations with Israel. This is the only enemy, and they have no problem to make any relations with any Arab regional or international entity. The fifth point is related to how keen Hamas was in its relations. It didn't want to be affiliated to any party or to any alliance. It didn't want to be under the umbrella of any country or any party, and they paid high price for that. They wanted to have their own political agenda in order not to serve other agendas, especially if those agendas are against their own understanding. Another point about building relations, which is related to finding the common grounds and building relations, they try to do that. And the seventh point is about linking between the formal openness and the popular openness. They didn't suffice with the formal openness, and they wanted to have some relations with the popular institutions or associations in the Arab world, and they tried to strike a balance between the two points. In order to support that, they they relied on having elements of strength on the ground, because they found that if they have the strength on the ground, they can impose themselves, politically speaking. The ninth point, they tried to commit as much as possible with the Islamic values that are the parameters for them as an Islamic movement, in terms of creating relations with the others, in terms of clarity, credibility, self-respect. They tried to uphold to these values in their relations. And there are other points, but I will stop here in terms of these points. And they also look for institutional relations with the other. In terms of their relations with the Arab world, Hamas, within the points that I mentioned, they focused on a number of points. First of all, non-interference in the internal affairs of the Islamic and Arab countries, not to get into any struggle within the countries or to take sides with any country in the struggles with other countries, and building fruitful relations in their strategic relations in a way that they can find a free environment that allows them to work in politics and media, and an environment that provide them unconditional support, financial and material support. And this will help them to solidify the position of those countries against settlement or against normalization. And in the Arab and the Islamic environment, there is the point of the realism, to learn from the lessons of the Palestinian issue and its history. Therefore, we can find a rational and open language, a language that doesn't call for the toppling of any regimes or any confrontation with the Arab or Islamic regimes. And even if they have any problem with a certain regime, they don't get into any direct confrontation with them. They tried to be patient on their own wounds, even if they are wounded or stabbed by those countries, in order to maintain this healthy relation with those countries. And they try to open these relations with everybody, whether they are considered part of the moderate line or the axis of resistance. It doesn't matter. They try to build relations, at least to the minimum, with any party that can help in supporting the resistance in Palestine at any level.
Of course, it's quite challenging to work in this contradictory and hard environment. In the international environment, we find that they focused in their political discourse on a number of points, including that their battle, and this is something I mentioned in the regional level as well, that their battle was within Palestine against the Zionist enemy in particular. Hence, it does not target the interests of any Western or American interests, even those in support of the Zionists or of Israel, and they focus on the injustice done to the Palestinians by the West, but in a methodical way that holds others responsible for this. And in their international media discourse and political international discourse, they were keen on using international resolutions and UN-based resolutions to enshrine the legitimacy of their resistance. That is, in general, the attempt in which they tried to position themselves and adapt to the surrounding environment. The other point is how this presence developed. I believe that this is an enormous question if we consider this since 1987 to date. If I very briefly give an overview, it is hard to overview everything, but in brief, the positioning between 1987 and 1993, they established their political committee, and despite the crisis in Kuwait and the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait, their political stance as a grassroots movement are a popular movement that tries to address this as a mediator. It was part of the delegation that went to Iraq at the time, and it also visited and initiated some relations with the Gulf state, even when it did not have a real power on and force on the ground. They had relations with Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Sudan, and other countries. This was all in until 1993. By 1997, they also have relations with Iran. By the end of 1992, 1993, we had Majlis Zuhur, and they opened up more to the international arena, and they met, the leadership of Hamas met with ambassadors and ministers from the US, the Britain, Italia, elsewhere, and before they classified Hamas as on the list of terrorism. But it showed that Hamas had an ability to adapt and work with others since the very beginning. But after Oslo, we had ups and downs. It created its relation with Jordan in 1994, but in 1994, with the exit of Musa Abu Marzouk and Imad al-Alami from Jordan and the other crises that followed, although there was a rise and improvement in the relations with the attempted assassination of Khaled Mush'al and the release of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and the qualitative meetings that Ahmed Yassin contributed to in a number of Islamic states, including Emirates, Syria, Sudan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere. But this was a period in which there was an attempt to uproot Hamas on the ground by the PLO after the martyr operations it undertook. So in 1997, and it exited from Jordan, or was expelled from Jordan, and its mobility was weakened. But it was the beginning of establishing relations with Syria and Qatar. A qualitative leap was established in Al-Aqsa uprising. Happened because of the marginalization of Hamas, harmed and damaged Hamas a lot. But the uprising brought it back to the forefront, and it imposed itself as a power of resistance that cannot be ignored, regardless of whether you like it or not. Hence, Egypt and other actors started to open their arms to it, and these facts established on the ground have imposed this reality through resistance. There were also Russian communications with it by the end of 2005, but at the same time, Hamas paid new prices by engaging in martyrdom operations, and with the post 9/11 world and world order, the occupation of Iraq, and it also put Hamas on the European list of terrorism, but it better positioned itself with Iraq, with Qatar and Syria. As for after 2006, and I'm being brief here because this in itself can be divided into multiple phases, but in 2006 it received political legitimacy in addition to its popular legitimacy, and in the following year it had the geographic division. So it has 3 points of strength at least. One of them is the political legitimacy, which is the legitimacy of the legislative council. So it had this political presence, but it was deprived of exercising its power on the ground because the Arab and international recognition was of the PLO, which not necessarily those who win the elections or who can create the or form the government or lead the legislative council. So this was another restriction on Hamas, on a cornering of Hamas. But every time a military operation would happen, Hamas imposed itself as a power to be reckoned with. In 2011, 2012, 2014, the Arab Spring in itself as well served Hamas for about 2 years, and it imposed itself again with the pro-resistance Egyptian regime and the changing Arab environment, but also then with the counter-attack on the Arab Spring. It paid the price again because the environment became hostile to it after 2014, and even those who were allied with it, because Hamas is a popular and Islamic movement. It exited Syria, and there was a sort of stagnation with Iran. But then this was followed by ups and downs in these relations. The compromise mode, or the also accord track, was totally a failure in the meanwhile, and no commitments on the Israeli part were honored. So Hamas continued, despite all, to be with other resistance factions on the forefront or a de facto power. Hence, all attempts to marginalize and topple Hamas failed, and it remained and enjoyed legitimacy, but could not practice it or exercise it on the ground as much as it wanted. To move to another point, what are the privileges or the strengths that served Hamas in its international and regional relations? There are a few points. To be brief, the first, there was a dynamic leadership, and I'm here speaking about a history of 35 years, not just today. There is a kind of dynamic leadership to a large extent, although this was in decline a bit with the expansion and the increase in the amount of responsibilities, but there was a lot of dynamism nonetheless in leadership, and also the fact that many of its leaders lived in the west as well, where they were able to understand and better accommodate for the ways to address the international community and deal with it one way or another. The other point is the general public support or grassroots movements that are in support of Islamic movements and resistance, and this is a broad public support in the Arab world who are anti-normalization as well. And every time there is an uprising or an incident in Palestine, this showed on the indicators of Arab communities, and it created pressure on the regimes of Arab states, and it constituted pressure despite their stance of Hamas. The third is that Hamas also made use of its network of relations with Islamic movements, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an extensive network of parties who are strong in their countries. Some are leading parties in their countries, which made it easier for Hamas to access those states and mobilize publicly for its work and for resistance. The other point is that the nature of the conflict in Palestine, the Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem, is by itself an action plan. So any time someone works for that agenda, they receive even further legitimacy. So their program is in itself mobilizing and creating its own constituency. It's easy to market yourself when you are working for the public interest of the people. And also there is the strength that it and the legitimacy it accumulated after the Al-Aqsa uprising, and then the political legitimacy it gained in the elections of 2006. Afterwards, there was the control over a particular territory or geography, which has become a de facto power that cannot be ignored in Gaza Strip. All of this was in favor of Hamas to various extent or various degrees. The first 20 years, Hamas was rather financially independent and was not at the mercy of anyone, although this financial support has increased later, but at least at the beginning it was largely free in its conduct and behavior and was not restricted by anyone because of its extensive public support, although much of it has eroded recently. On the other hand, in regional environment, what are the shortcomings and what are the challenges that Hamas suffered? I believe that in the general framework, Hamas has suffered 5 or 6 main programs or problems. Sorry, the first was the classification of Hamas on the American list of terrorism and then on the European list of terrorism, and putting the policies based on the international policies based on this, which restricted the reach of Hamas, making many refrain from cooperating with Hamas regarding of their position of Hamas, just in order not to offend or confront or challenge the West or the Americans in particular. So this was one of the restrictions that restricted Hamas's mobility. The other point was the conditions imposed by the quartet after 2006, after it won the elections in 2006, and those conditions were introduced after that when they became a main partner in official and formal operation of the governance. In 2006, those conditions were introduced in order to paralyze its ability to improve its relations and to work in governance, including those conditions included abiding by the decisions of PLO, recognition of the Zionist or Israeli entity, etc., all of which constituted a nullification of the very character of Hamas. The other point was the affiliation, the Islamic affiliation or character of Hamas was outstanding and provided it with its own personality, created support and public support, but it had its own price as well. So if you have this public support, you will sacrifice the official support, because most official or formal circles were hostile or opposed to Islamic movements. So we had a number of regimes, particularly after the experience of what's the so-called Arab Spring in 2012, 2013, there was more cornering of Hamas because of affiliating to or with this movement. The other issue is related to the adoption of
والبيئة الدولية تدعم مسار العمل
armed strife in an environment that supports the compromise or concessions, while Hamas insists on resistance. So to work as an Islamist and a resistant movement, then you have two levels of complicating your mobility. This is something that Hamas had to pay the price for because it was moving against the general current of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and elsewhere, particularly the most important and strategic powers. Even Turkey in general has its own way of supporting the two-state solution, and the international community supports the two-state solution. So how can you market yourself when you have this identity and you work on this track? This was rather challenging dealing with such an environment. The fifth challenge and problem was the issue of legitimacy, the Palestinian legitimacy. So despite the fact that Hamas received a lot of popularity and the fact that it comes at the forefront of in opinion polls and in among resistance movements, and although it was last year about to win the elections, and despite the sort of Jerusalem battle and despite a Palestinian consensus, until today Hamas has not become part of decision making or of PLO in the National Council or the Executive Committee. So its access to the Arab politica or the international arena is still complicated. The sixth point is the overlap of relations between Hamas and the region, which is quite complicated. Hamas tried to be open to all states in the region. That is theoretically, but that doesn't mean that the other were responsive. So it's not necessarily, it was, the love was reciprocal, so to speak. It was faced with rejection from the environment and suffered from exclusion by the Gulf states over the past years. But at the same time, it also converged with the so-called axis of resistance, Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. But at the same time, it agrees with it in terms of its resistance policies and its anti-Zionist discourse, but it finds itself that it does not agree with it in its political action on the ground against the people of the region, who are themselves the strategic constituency and public support for Hamas. And this creates a contradiction in policy making and striking a balance between their interests in such a relation and between striking relations with the people of those states whose governments have policies against them or against their independence and sovereignty. So this was problematic for. How much longer do you think you need? I need 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, good. Go ahead, please. I'm really sorry, it's quite complicated, but let me say that even on the side of problems and challenges, there are also internal challenges for which Hamas has paid the price because of the way it acted and because of the structure of work through which it operates. For example, when we say that Hamas did not make appropriate use of the communities, the figures, the people abroad as much as it could have to develop a political discourse in different languages, although it has a good public presence in the diaspora. So until today, there is weakness or a lack of communication in international languages. There are many who communicate in Arabic, but there is weak English communication and next to non-existent in other languages, although the Hamas should be able to secure this multilingual communication. Also, there is the bureaucracy or bureaucratic behavior, which my colleagues probably hinted at, which is that you have the offices that look like a state institution, but also have to adapt themselves to being at the same time a resistance movement. Or a revolutionary movement. This adaptation is not easy. Also, the overlap between specializations or jurisdictions between the Islamic international jurisdiction, the offices, there is an overlap in the authority and the division of work between the regions as well. So this leads to some confusion in performance. All of this causes many problems. I don't want to take too long. Also, there is the distance between the leaders, between the West Bank, Gaza, and the diaspora, which creates a challenge as well. Based on that, what can be learned as lessons learned for the work in the future? Hamas remains a promising movement. It is on the rise, although it's a slow rise, and one that is challenged because it's working and moving against the public current, but it doesn't mean that it's not doesn't have public constituency. And also the Palestinian environment and constituency in their vast majority are opposed to compromise and are pro-resistance. So the potential of Hamas transforming from this hostile attempt to partnership with Fatah, it has the great potential to take the lead and move forward as well. I think that Hamas has to develop a political discourse that is advanced and that takes into consideration all the interests of all Palestinians and all Palestinian components, and that takes into consideration all the things that Dr. Hani mentioned as well, and understands the overall Palestinian framework within the vision of the Hamas as an Islamic and a resistance movement. It also has to work on the institutionalization of its foreign relations and to address overlaps between its various authorities and jurisdictions, and has also to develop its own symbols and figures who can communicate Hamas's vision in different languages internationally, and also have to work on the common ground with the international discourse related to the international law and human rights, and also to present and be able to present a discourse that presents the Zionist project for what it is, and also to market its political thought correctly, and also to market its political charter appropriately, and it has the capacity to do this, and also to activate the role of Palestinians in the diaspora and make use of their potential, especially that many of them agree with its agenda in the first place. I'm sorry if I have taken too long. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mohsen, for this really comprehensive overview and presentation. He talked about the regional and international scene for Hamas. He talked about a number of points. The first is Hamas's vision in managing international regional relations, and also then the development of relations in regional and Arab relations, and then the challenges, and the fifth was the most important lessons. He said that the project of Hamas was aimed at the awakening or development, and it's in regional and international relations. He said, referred to a study by the Institute of the Middle East that said that those international relations and regional relations are part of their resistance strategy and part of their vision for liberalization, and that they believe that the Palestinian people belong to the Arab and Islamic people, and they constitute its strategic dimension, and that this Zionist project does not only target the Palestinian territory and land, but also it targets the awakening and development of the whole Islamic nation, and is keen on preventing peace and prosperity for the people of the region. He also said that Hamas has no problem in building relations with all powers except for the Zionist enemy. It's quite flexible, and in building its relations, it's insisted on its independence and refrained from being under the authority of anyone or any government or any agenda. And it's always tried to look for common ground and ways to converge with the other, and it's tried to link popular and official links and relations and tried to strike a balance between the two, and it always tried to own the factors on the ground. The last thing he mentioned is that it also worked in an institutionalized manner in its relations with the others. As for building relations with the Arab and Islamic world, there were a number of parameters. First of all, that Hamas never intervened in the internal affairs, not to affiliate with certain axes in the region, and to use a realistic and refrain from clashes. As in the international arena, it was keen on presenting the battle as between the Zionists and the Palestine, and that it would not target the Western powers, even those who are pro-Zionist.
The second point is how this capability was improved, and he talked about several phases where this force improved in different phases when the relations started to improve with with some regimes, and there were diplomatic consultants or ambassadors, and this gave it some capabilities and some bravery. After Oslo, these relations started to have some ups and downs, and this was he gave an example of Jordan and how this with the getting Sheikh Ahmed Yassin outside, and he talked about the relations with Syria, and there was also some kind of marginalization, but this also increased again after the Intifada of Al-Aqsa, when Hamas proved itself again, and it was put then at it was designated as a terrorist group. Then after the elections, it got legitimacy in the elections, and it had power on the ground. But with the increase of the Islamic movements, this legitimacy increased. But after the Arab Spring, it was negative. It was impacted negatively with the getting out of Syria, and it affected its relation with Syria and Iran. Nevertheless, the project to topple or marginalize Hamas failed. He talked about also something that is the high dynamics of the leadership, especially those who were living in the West. And he talked about the good constituency and the strong constituency in the Islamic world. He said that Hamas benefited from the network of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Muslims in the world. And he said that the centrality of the cause, the Palestinian cause, is able to mobilize people around the Al-Aqsa and against the Zionists. And the formal resistance and that allowed it to get into the elections. All of these issues helped Hamas. Also, having a financial independence gave it the independence in movement. In terms of the challenges or the threats, there were different points. First, the designation of Hamas as a terrorist group in Europe and the United States. It limited this international arena, and it put Hamas in a limited way of dealing. And the second one, the conditions of the quartet, which put limitations also in the political activity of Hamas and weakened it. And in terms of capabilities. And the third one is the Islamic affiliation, which can be a strength, but it's also a negative thing in terms of the political work. And the fourth one was the work in the international regional environment, which is a challenge. And if you bring together the Islam and resistance, so of course it will be a double challenge for it, even from the friendly states. The fifth challenge is the legitimacy, because outside the formal Palestinian or it is outside the official Palestinian structures, so this make it difficult for it to get into the Arab regions and the Arab countries, or to make relations with countries that might be against the resistance, and this will have a price to be paid, and it might conflict with the strategic constituency. And he mentioned Iran as an example. The 6th or 7th point, he called them the strategic challenges and the inability to communicate with foreign languages and the decision-making process with in this regard. The last point that he talked about, the lessons learned, he said that Hamas is a promising movement and it is growing, but slowly because it is functioning in a complicated environment, and those who are involved in this issue should work together through building an national front and building it should also work through building on the commonalities and promote its political vision and activating the Palestinians in diaspora. The paper is rich and there are a lot of points in this paper, so thank you very much. Now we have almost 15 minutes for each commentator. We will start with Mr. Jawad Al-Hamad and then Wa'il Shadid, and then I will give the floor to speakers to respond to the comments. Mr. Jawad, go ahead. Thank you, Dr. Sami, and thanks to the speakers. The discussion is very interesting. We have a lot of I agree with a lot of points, but there are some disagreements. But I will get immediately into the discussion because I will talk about the Palestinian Hamas that combine the authority and resistance since long ago. Hamas is still managing Gaza and part of the community. This is a revolutionary point that happens, whether it is unprecedented or precedented or it is successful or not. This is something different. But to talk about the experience, I believe that we need to have some criteria to evaluate it. Maybe the titles of the papers can give us this criterion, but I will quickly give this criteria to see how we reach this evaluation. First, how to what extent Hamas will continue to maintain resistance after it became in power. This is an important question. And the second one is the capability of running the authority under occupation before it got authority, during and after. And how Hamas is dealing with the challenges, a lot of the challenges that are happening. It is very important. It's very important to take these challenges into consideration. First of all, the Fatah and the problems with Hamas and how Hamas dealt with the Fatah employees and all of the cadres that were in the Liberation Army, they were from Fatah, and Hamas started to run part of the army, and they are started to face an ideology that is different from their ideology. And then the security also point and how they managed the corruption in the public sphere, and this is because of the bureaucracy that we have in all of the Arab world. So the agents, the tribes, and the families that are armed were part of that. The security apparatus that had some kind of rebellion, and the other armed factions, whether they accepted or didn't accept to deal with Hamas, or they tried to put one foot in this side and the other foot in the other side. What was the struggling agenda of Hamas before 2007 and after handing over the the government to Mahmoud Abbas. What were the relations of Hamas before that? And one of the speakers said how Hamas dealt with the Oslo Accord. Hamas didn't come to the authority in agreement. This is the project of Hamas alone. But Hamas, the government in Gaza Strip, didn't announce not once that it will eliminate the Oslo Accord and that it is going to deal with the reality with the minimum possible. And how it managed its relations with the authority and the PLO. This was it started in a way and ended in another way. How it handed over the authority, that was a coup against Hamas, and there was a kind of dynamics in the Palestinian community that led to having the government in Gaza for Hamas apart or away from Fatah, so to speak. After this experience, was Hamas engagement in the authority or its participation in the elections under Oslo Accords, did that serve the Palestinian cause and the national cause? It wasn't answered in the papers, or was it the reason for the for the retreats of the cause and the resistance and the program of Hamas? This answer is not provided in the papers. These are important issues that should have been dealt with more deeply, and maybe in the future this can happen. At least in reading the experience of Hamas in the Palestinian Authority and in resistance, we can conclude the following. First, the most important point is the improvement of the resistance in Gaza from being prosecuted and arrested or dealing with agents into a resistance that the occupation is unable to deal with it. The second point, it caused defeat to the enemy, and we should not talk about balance or a deterrence or deterrent balance. This should be removed from the dictionary of the Palestinian cause, but it was a case of deterrence against the Israelis, and it became part of the it has a power that can be used when it is necessary. The improvement that happened in the past 15 years improved the resistance against the occupation on the three fronts. It is talking about the 48 territories, the West Bank and Al-Quds and the Gaza Strip at the same time. And it opened a fourth front, which was the diaspora, Palestinians in diaspora, which moved or mobilized the public opinion and the people who are on to the side of the rights of the Palestinian people in America, Latin America, in Europe, in Canada, and it has made legal and political movement in addition to the media movement. I believe this confuse the Israelis at the international level. It showed the falsification of its the facts that they provide, and it was very strategic and important point. And by the way, there was a kind of the dynamics for the Palestinians in diaspora to be an active player. This wasn't this is unprecedented in the Arab world or the Palestinian world, and this is the fruit of the work of the past 40 years. Then the threatening the use of the rockets against the occupation. Recently, the resistance made 4 conditions, which is the preventing sacrifices, preventing the invasion of Al-Aqsa, and the demonstration of the flags, and not to attack Palestinians, and the four points were, or the four conditions were implemented. The problem of the security agencies in Gaza Strip, they are which are going into demonstrations, and they are preventing the government from working. These are examples, in addition to sometimes launching Katyusha rockets on the meetings of the Palestinian government, so that have to do with to meet underground, afraid of the rockets of the Palestinian Security Authority, and not to people or outlandish or illegal forces. Hamas depends on the three aspects in the authority. First, that purified Gaza Strip from the agents, not 100%, but to a large extent. I don't know why Hamas or others speak about this. There were agents who fled to Israel, others who fled outside, and others who were arrested, or some measures were made. They also purified the Gaza Strip from the drug dealers and the prostitution centers that were managed by the Palestinian Authority, and they also and they said that the weapon of the resistance cannot be touched, but they put all other weapons under control because there were other armed people, and this is an unprecedented success that has no match in the Arab and Islamic world. They also managed to deal with the or to make relations with the president. In the diplomatic work, there was a Hamas met in the Arab League in the foreign minister, and it managed to live with the Arab environment. And in the summit of Riyadh, there was an agreement with Hamas by the Arab League and the Saudi foreign minister on the paragraph that has to do with the Palestine a week before the summit. And that's why Ismail Haniyeh joined the summit side by side with Mahmoud Abbas, and that was unprecedented, which means that which meant that Hamas was making some pragmatic moves, which doesn't mean that they are against their agenda. There were destructive wars against the Gaza Strip, and they were steadfast, and they continued to provide the assistance and services to their people, whether by the reconstruction or providing the financial assistance to the people, or collecting funds from outside Gaza to bring funds into Gaza. In terms of the siege, it also managed the issue of siege very effectively. The international community didn't expect that Hamas will survive more than 1 year, and I can say that there is no decision in any international institution or with Israel to impose siege against Gaza, but that was linked with the conditions of the quartet, and the Jordanian and the Egyptian sides are participating in this siege. Breaking the siege is very important. There were some steps through the sea or through other means. I believe these are important issues. What is the future from this experience? The first point, I believe, the importance of Hamas steadfastness to be part of the Palestinian cause. It is very threatening for Hamas to be designated as a terrorist movement. And by the way, the Palestinian Authority, or those who designated Al-Qassam battalions as a terrorist group, was Yasser Arafat, when Hamas didn't want to participate in the Palestinian Authority after the first elections in the 90s. In addition to its holding to its movement and its political organization and resistance organization. So these things go line in line, and they wanted to they didn't want to be isolated from the Palestinian condition in order not to be eliminated altogether. They also built on the joint or the commonalities, and I believe that the things that the document that was prepared in 2006 can be a common ground for them after its improvement. And if there is a Palestinian front, national front that can be established, not necessarily by the resistance groups, but with all the factions, including Fatah, I believe they should all build on the national consensus of 2006, and there were all factions signed up this document. And approving on one document is not an easy thing. Now, if those organizations who believe in resistance, 7 or 8 or 10, do you think that it is easy to agree on a document of national consensus in a few hours? Of course not. The third point, in terms of the planning of politics or policy, Hamas should continue to do politics and to provide that work. Then the importance of building a stable relation with Fatah. Unfortunately, that relation is facing a lot of troubles because of both sides. And I believe that Hamas doesn't have, after this experience, it has no other choice but to have a stable relation with Fatah movement today before other problems might happen, because things might go to in a way that will lead to the collapse of Fatah, and Hamas might also be eliminated. This is a very dangerous, and Hamas should read it very correctly. I believe things that are said or the discourse now has nothing to do with the reality. The reality now, this is a regime, so to speak, a ruling regime, and in all of the Arab world, the nationalist and Islamic groups, we are trying to have stable relations with the regime. So why don't we do that in Palestine? Some or one of the colleagues said that it didn't give or didn't present a good example of an Islamic movement. It's not requested to do that, and if you believe so you are mistaken, and because it is very difficult to provide that. But one of the colleagues mentioned that this was difficult in the same context. Hamas is not a political, is an Islamic movement to make reforms within the regime. It is a resistance movement. 2 minutes and I will finish. So Hamas, in its when it participated in the municipality elections, and because it was selected to participate, its philosophy was to lead the Palestinians to Palestinians' struggle with the authority, and not only to get into authority. Now, after this experience, I suggest to Hamas and to others that they should forget about getting into the PLO, because all of these issues failed in the past, and there is an Arab veto, including Syria, from having Hamas an alternative to Hamas the PLO at the time, or to be a leading for resistance. I will give you an example to what extent, how much the resistance factions accepted to have Hamas as a leader. This is very important. Hamas should not be delusioned that there is acceptance within the factions to lead them. They accept to lead the battle or to lead or to participate, but not to be the leading party or the political system. And you can, and of course, Hamas, so many issues were failed for Hamas.
في جيبة حركة فتح تستخدمها كختم وكما تروا أنتم هذا الكلام في المفاوضات ليس إلا تستند هذه المرجعية إلى.
So as we see, PLO is used by Fatah, and because it has some kind of legitimacy amongst the Palestinians, and that's why the PLO is still there, but it's not functioning anymore. These are the points that I wanted to mention. In terms of the political thoughts of Hamas, there were a lot of improvements that we need to take into consideration. We are talking about plenty of years, and there were so many years that led to the improvement in the thought of Hamas. They should be taken into consideration. Now, Hamas thoughts is not frozen. Of course, there are principles that has to do with the Islamic background and with the issue of the national issue. But in political practice, it is an developing thought that takes into consideration the international, regional, Arab, and Islamic developments. And this is something that we can take into consideration. And we have a book that speaks about the political mindset or mentality of Hamas until 1996, and we need to continue that study to see their political thoughts after 96. I believe that Hamas is facing a lot of challenges now, and I agree that living in illusions will destroy any Palestinian leadership. Today, if Hamas is tempted with any victory here or there, whether it is tactical or strategic, or if it is tempted by the tendencies of some countries like Iran, or that it is being mobilized with the Iranian thought, because Iran is not confronting Israel, and it will never confront Israel directly. Iran uses allies or tools or elements, but to Palestinian, this has to do with Palestine, not with the regional aspect, and the results are being used for their own interests. So whether it is Turkey or Iran or any Arab country, the same applies to all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jawad. God bless you. Now the final comment before the response of the speakers. Dr. Wael Jadid for 15 minutes, please, so we finish on time. I thank you and SIGA in Sabah Din Zaim University. This is quite a delicate and critical question, because this experience of a resistance movement in the political arena is unique in our Arab world and probably across the world. Actually, after this discussion and those valuable papers, I would like to focus on the strategic dimension of the management of Hamas, of the issue of resistance or its position in the government. I will focus between 2006 to date. I will not go back in history beyond that. The first point to be made here, particularly the strategic point, is the repercussions of decisiveness. What are the strategic repercussions of this decisiveness and or resolve which happened in 2006? The first strategic transformation that faced Hamas after this resolve was, or this resolution was, to take control of a specific piece of territory, which created a main transformation in their political program, because they have taken control of a territory, and also in their military strategy between the street-to-street warfare to the protection of a territory. So there were these strategic transformations, and also the other transformation was to change to a semi-state and to be in control of 2 million Palestinians or 2 million citizens. It's a semi-state one way or another. And it also was transformed in terms of whether it runs a resistance or a government. Is it the economy of a state or the economy of resistance? Is it the budget of resistance or the budget of a state? Would the discourse be changed to a semi-state or to resistance? All of these issues created transformations, and the hierarchy of both the resistance and the government, it all created structural implications. The other issue was with the withdrawal of Sharon from Gaza Strip. Always this was partly because of the resistance, the pressure by resistance, but at the same time it was a planned move by Sharon in order to divide the Palestinians. So Israel accomplished a strategic objective, but we will also talk about the negative implications for the occupation as well. On a strategic level, the problem that Hamas faced in this case, and everybody hinted at it, which is the monopoly of power over Gaza, but it depends, it was dependent at the same time on Israel and on the PLO for economic reasons, and could not let go of its identity as a resistance movement, and surely could not give up this approach in any way. So a main problem in Hamas strategy, which started to emerge after 2007, which I would like to call falling into the trap of undermining and denial. In other words, Hamas started to implement tactics on the ground that undermine its strategy, and that was problematic. And it was also in denial of reality and denial that it was what it was doing, and it was in a strange denial position while its tactics on the ground were undermining its strategy. For example, Hamas wanted to follow or engage in the Oslo process and start a government with Fatah under Oslo, etc., but wanted to run contrary to the people of Oslo who created this political sphere. How can you do this and call it political practice when you acknowledge there is a problem, that's political structure or that's political practice? But when you engage in this while you reject the framework within which you create your government, of course the quartet would impose conditions on you if you are engaging in politics within the framework of Oslo. The other issue is related to the Palestinian division. There is also undermining. You want to decrease division with the use of an Oslo-based approach with a strategy that is completely in contradiction with your resistance strategy. So how can you say that you are working to overcome this division when your strategies are so contradictory, and unless one gives in to the other, there is no compromise that can be reached? Another problem in this issue was that Hamas sometimes wanted to assimilate itself to Hezbollah, and call itself, why it would say, why can't I be a power like Hezbollah? So here there is a failure in understanding the strategy of Hamas. Hezbollah is a basic, essential component that is recognized in a formal state, non-occupied state, and is recognized by other regional powers. So you cannot liken the situation of Hamas to the situation of Hezbollah, because you are not a state. You can't claim to be a resistance movement within a state because you're not a state, and Lebanon is not occupied by comparison. Also, there was the quick moves and the transformation by being from a resistance movement without going through a phase of national liberation directly to establishing a government or governance. The other problematic issue was the financial crisis or dilemma. As my colleagues mentioned, it had diversified financial resources. After the policy of drying up its resources, the only resource became Iran, and there is a fear that, and also Qatar, that supports salaries in Gaza, but this creates many problems that we have witnessed on the rise over the past few weeks, and here we are concerned that this would make Hamas be co-opted in a regional agenda because of this financial dependency. The other issue, as Mr. Shihab mentioned, which is depriving Hamas from legal legitimacy, because Fatah realizes that if it gives Hamas legal legitimacy, it would fall altogether. And there is also the problematic issue between being a structure of resistance and a structure of governance, which created a big problem, and it is now closer to a party-run or party-governed state. What does that mean? It means that people who are loyal to the party but non-specialized or non-technocrats that take positions in the government, and this what creates the problem of bureaucracy, lack of representation, corruption, call it what you may. And there is also the hostile attitude of other states towards Hamas, because the international community does not accept Hamas, because accepting Hamas is an acceptance of political Islam, and this is generally rejected. But on the other hand, and I agree with my colleagues, Hamas on the national and regional level, it is the symbol of resistance. It is the pole of resistance, a balanced resistance, not only in Palestine but in the Arab world, and needs to be developed, and it's balanced and understood as such at the level of the Arab as well as the Islamic world, and it had its power in the West Bank and the Arabs of 1948. And of course, they were very innovative in their innovation in arms and weapons. We also mentioned that Sharon withdrew from Gaza Strip deliberately to incur division amongst Palestinians, but it was a dilemma for the occupation themselves, and the occupation had to find out whether to start a full-fledged war or confrontation or reach a truce. So it's a strategic failure that affects some of the geopolitics inside Israel. There is also the accumulation of power, which we stand witness to, and also the liberation of certain prisoners, and also the deterrence, which is not a balance of deterrence, but a position of deterrence, and also creating an Islamic model for governance, that you are leading a community, call it a state or a semi-state or whatever. They gave a manifestation of this situation or this symbol. The other point of for Hamas is that it embarrassed Fatah and revealed its helplessness in its strategy and security coordination with the occupation. The last point is lessons learned. From a strategic point of view, you will find that Hamas after 2006 you will not feel that there is a clear strategy for Hamas, but as much as Hamas started with a Mensberg, which is a strategy in hindsight. So you 10 years later look at the track you followed, not because you followed a plan, but because of what happened to you based on an action-reaction point or method, and because Hamas did not plan for this and was put in a strategic position that's much larger than its potentials. So this realized the strategy was far from being planned. The other point is that Egypt, whether we like it or not, whether Hamas likes it or not, will continue to be an important actor and influencer of the situation of Hamas now and in the future. Or the third is the impact of the dependency on Iran, on Hamas's popularity and agenda. The fourth is that the Palestinian question is complicated for all parties, for Hamas, Palestinians, as well as the occupation itself. And I believe my colleagues mentioned this, and this requires to be addressed quite elaborately without individual factions trying to address it on their own. And my colleagues proposed, for example, a national front. Another lesson learned is that the occupation, the authority, and the international community depend a lot on two important strategic dimensions. First of all, the possibilities and the resources, the existing resources. In other words, they want to reduce a lot the available possibilities for economic and political possibilities, and hence you create a lot of unemployment and economic stagnation, which creates a burden on you. So you have one of two options: either to bring funding to pay for those unemployed people, or you include them in the military and security apparatus, which in itself creates a financial burden. And it will create a problem and further implicate you in the financial attrition. How long would you need more? 2 minutes. I'm concluding. The other point I wanted to point out was that Hamas has not been able so far to invest or make use of any strategic interest from the accomplishments or successes in previous wars. And this is something we have to study. So we find them being used as tactical successes rather than strategic, and I believe this is due to the hostile environment, which does not allow for those military victories to be used, and also the continuation of lack of horizons in Gaza Strip through this financial attrition and reduction of possibilities. And the third is because of the centralized approach of Hamas in its governance, and forgets about in Gaza and forgets about other areas which may contribute to celebrating and making use of those successes. The idea of legal legitimacy. What happened? We can't hear you anymore. I will just repeat the last point. So the PLO will remain the only recognized legitimate representative, and legal legitimacy would be shut down for the Hamas unless PLO fails, but Hamas would try to maintain authority. And because the fall of the authority would be a major transformation or a turning point for the situation in Palestine. And the other point is that Hamas needs a restructuring of its strategy based on the understanding of the existing strategic environment and refraining from the realized strategy and away from Gaza-centric policies and based on popular diplomacy and mobilization. And the final point is to, according to the current factors, Hamas remains outstanding in Palestine in terms in combining resistance, popular support, and executive governance, and it is the international community that remains restrictive for the prospects of Hamas unless a change in the regional or strategic environment of Palestine changes Hamas's and any other Palestinian factions. Situation is hard to be changed. This last point was very important and needs to be repeated, that a strategic change should be using the opportunity of any changes in the environment. Thank you for this comment. We are only left with the final comments by two of our speakers. Unfortunately, Dr. Hani had to leave and he said he wanted to listen to the comments, so I will share the link to this session afterwards with him because he had to leave and had a prior commitment. We need really to stop at the head of the hour, so let's commit by the time. Mr. Abdurrahman, thanks for all the commentators. I agree to a large extent with them, and I have identified some parameters for Hamas and for its definition as a movement, but most importantly that there are restrictions in considering it an experience of governance, but it does govern a specific part or territory. So what I discussed were the points that it has authority on. So I did not detail the issues of health and education, but I also shed light on some of the goals that it has set, and our colleagues mentioned that they achieved a lot in terms of resistance and armament, and I might have not mentioned this in my presentation, but I mentioned it in my paper, which is that there is a lot of challenge in terms of civil war, which and strife, and it has imposed itself and acquired a lot of popularity and public support. In terms of deterrence, yes, there is a situation of deterrence, but not a balance of deterrence. But we have to understand the concept of deterrence from an Israeli point of view. The Israelis consider resolve. That resolve leads to deterrence, and deterrence is that your adversary or your enemy would not consider to start hostilities against you. So after 1948, they started to say we needed another victory over the Arabs so they would recognize our presence as a final fact on this ground, and they achieved that in 1967, but deterrence was not achieved even after 1967. Although in the October 1973 there was a bit of deterrence, but now no one refrains from considering resistance against Israel, and we have come a long way in resisting this entity. So when we say the balance of deterrence, we're not talking about equal footing, but when Netanyahu says he would not want to go to any additional war in Gaza, what does that mean? He considered that this is a war that is
في دخوله إلى قطاع غزة لدخل يوميا كما يدخل في الضفة الغربية. الشروط
If it was not costly, they would have entered Gaza on a daily basis like they do in the West Bank. In order not to repeat those 4 conditions after the Sword of Jerusalem battle, the occupation agreed to those conditions because of the deterrence. This state, which is a right-wing state, was accepted this because of the strength of the resistance. The other point I wanted to talk about, which is the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and to say that it was a decision that targeted resistance, and that resistance had a clear role in this division. I would like to refer you to a book that summarizes all the second uprising since its beginning until the end, with the withdrawal from Gaza and the end of the rule of Sharon. This book talks clearly about the persuasion of Sharon that Arafat was the only person who needed to be get rid of in their battle against terrorism. And after they got rid of Yasser Arafat, the agreements fell apart and the terrorism in their definition did not stop. So it was a reckless, unprecedented decision, which is to withdraw from Gaza. It wasn't based on information or studies or think tanks or strategic planning in Israel. There was a proposition that many intellectuals refer to, which is the the Palestinian cause book from Java Center, which proposes 6 scenarios, the 6th and the last of which was the withdrawal of Gaza from Gaza, not the first. Thank you so much, Mr. Abdurrahman. Now, the final word for. Can you unmute yourself, please? Mohsen Saleh, Dr. Mohsen Saleh. Thank you so much, and I thank Dr. Jawad Al-Hamad and Mr. Wael and for their valuable and very beneficial remarks. God bless you. Since I agree to most of the points that you have made, I don't want to repeat myself. I would only like to remind of one point when we deal with a movement like Hamas. Could you please address a point that no one that mentioned, which is the Charter of 2017? Do you have any remarks on this? I only wanted to mention one point, and I believe if I delve into the 2017 Charter, I will take too long. You have 5 minutes. You can use them as much as you wish or the way you wish. I believe that the main point is that we are dealing with a movement that describes itself as an Islamic resistance movement. So Hamas introduces itself as an Islamic movement and as a jihadi resistance movement. The challenge is in political practice on the ground, in political thought, not only for us to just look at the performance and propose or talk about practices that are pragmatic or based on certain interests, in which Hamas or whoever is proposing for Hamas, the main parameter that forget that the main parameter is its Islamic affiliation and resistance character. Those are essential parameters and determinants that it cannot overcome, and it has to deal with its pragmatic considerations through this. So I believe that what is required basically is not how Hamas would get rid of its religiosity, of its Islamic character, but how to run a project and translate it on the ground, develop political thought and political discourse and political practice on the ground that is consistent and in harmony with its commitments and its identity. So we're not even when we talk about pragmatic and interest-based practices, which are in the gray zone or that marginalize the main identity, then the Hamas has to adapt itself to this national environment and the international arena. And I believe this is a major undertaking for Hamas to be harmonious with itself and with its project and with its surrounding. And interests have to be managed within this framework. And I believe that many points can be addressed if this were clear. Among the applications of this is the situation in Palestine, the relation with Fatah, the establishment of relations, etc. But let me say that the main challenge I found in studying the experience of Hamas is that many of the attempts to accommodate or dilute this character in the Palestinian or the Arab levels make that this character absent from decision making. And the main challenge is how to maintain your character, your identity, and accommodate positively and actively without making this disadvantage or a restriction that would restrict your mobility, but rather develop it. Thank you so much for all your words and your contributions, which I hope that would be taken further. And I am awaiting the papers in their final form or the final draft before the end of July. The point is we are trying to collect all of those papers by the end of Tuesday. We will have finished more than 100 hours of reviews of Islamic movements, and then we will review another 11 movements to a total of 160 hours of evaluation of Islamic movements. And we hope that this project would materialize and crystallize into this publication. I thank all of our speakers, Dr. Mohammed Mohsen Saleh, Dr. Raed, Dr. Hussam and the other points in the other speakers also in the afternoon, Dr. Mohsen Saleh and this Wael Shadid and all the commentators and speakers and guests. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow in our examination of another experience in Yemen at 2 p.m. In Istanbul, 11 GMT. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow. We're going to be talking, and the day after we're going to be about Al-Islah Party in Yemen.